Well, thanks everybody for joining us to celebrate International Day of Indigenous People. We have put together, assembled a panel of Indigenous entrepreneurs throughout the world, mainly America, the US, Canada, and Australia, include myself. And today we'll discuss, the thought leaders will share their stories, discuss how we can create a better world through Indigenous entrepreneurship. So some of the topics discussed will be some differences between Indigenous versus Western entrepreneurship, some of the challenges trying to access capital and grow their business, government policies and quote unquote support, which can be a challenge sometimes, and how Indigenous entrepreneurship can create a better world and make things more sustainable. So firstly, I'd like to acknowledge traditional owners throughout Australia and the world, and wish to pay my respects to First Nations elders, past and present, and acknowledge the important role First Nations people have and continue to play within innovation, environmental management, and the global business community in general. If it's your first time that you've heard of International Day of the World's Indigenous People, it's a United Nations sponsored holiday on today in Australia, August 9th, tomorrow in the States and Canada. Once you wake up, that commemorates the cultural and historical significance Indigenous people around the world. So this day is a chance for you to reflect on how you can help to dismantle structures that are built on false beliefs, aka decolonization. The United Nations is also running an event which will kick off 9 a.m. US and Canada time tomorrow morning. Tonight in Australia around about 11 p.m. if you've got the time to join, and see how that goes for that United Nations run events. Without further ado, I'd like to quickly introduce you to the speakers who will talk more about themselves, and I don't want to steal their thunder. But we've got Jenn Harper from Canada, mother and an entrepreneur. In addition to Jen's full-time career and entrepreneur journey, she started an online e-commerce cosmetics company with a purpose called Cheekbone Beauty, which was born to give back. And I'm sure you've seen it featured on international news. They're doing wonderful work. Melody Lewis from the US, she started Indigenous Community Collaboration, which is amplifying Indigenous perspectives in workplace development and education. She's also driven with a desire to create a vision to find education and career opportunities for students, individuals seeking personal growth, and communities and employers. Last but not least, for the women First Nations entrepreneurs, we've got Vanessa Roanhorse, who returned to the Southwest region in 2016 and launched Roanhorse Consulting, which is dedicated to providing support to overlooked communities with a focus on Indigenous communities. She's also a co-founder of Native Women Led, an organization dedicated to growing Native women in positions of leadership and business, which also, I think, won a massive contract or grant recently. Ching Ching, so they're doing amazing work, and they've got some fuel in the tank to, I guess, take things to the next level and have a bigger impact through Indigenous entrepreneurship and their work. Stephen, the lone male, which wasn't on purpose, but Stephen, born in Brisbane, studied social science, majoring in development and minoring in environmental and society. He extends his passion for community as the executive director, founder of SIBW, which is a cultural publishing and events business. So there we go. Awesome group of panel speakers, and without further ado, yeah, I'd like to ask if get them to introduce themselves, their background, and their business to kick off this panel discussion. Starting with Lucky Jen from Canada.
I don't know. Does it make me lucky when you get First off, I'm so excited to be on this panel with these incredible entrepreneurs. I'm in admiration of Vanessa. When we heard the news of this last week, it's mind blowing. And the more I share my story with everyone today, it's the capital that was injected into Cheekbone Beauty that has propelled and led to the success of what we're doing as a company. And without that, it would be absolutely impossible. So it's just critical and crucial that Native-led organizations get capital to disperse among entrepreneurs that just have like that little seedling of an idea and what it can do. So I had no experience in the beauty space whatsoever. I was actually spent 8 years in the seafood industry and predominantly spent my whole career in the food industry. But back in 2014, I got sober. And then a few months later, literally had this incredible life-changing dream. I wake up, it's January 2015, it's the middle of the night, and I pop out of bed and I just had this dream where all of these Native little girls were covered in lip gloss. This is the highlight of the dream, the thing I remember the most. And I just remember their joy on their faces and their laughter. And I literally grabbed my laptop that night and started writing out what I now was the beginning of our business plans at Cheekbone Beauty. And what I wanted to do was create a product, which happened to be lip gloss from that dream, and start a foundation in my grandmother's name. My grandmother, Emily Paul, was a residential school survivor. So you have to understand, like at this time, I'm going through this incredible healing journey, learning about the history of my family and how that had played a massive role in who I had become and how I got to the place in my life where I did. But then realizing that despite the what we now know is called generational or transgenerational trauma, how those things affected my entire life, but then how I had the ability now to turn that entire story around and create a better life for not only myself, but my community, my family, and every, our mission and vision at Cheekbone Beauty is helping every Indigenous kid on the planet see and feel their value in the world where we're crafting sustainable color cosmetics. So the beginning of idea of the business is, okay, great. We have this idea. We want to help our community. We wanted to do something to support them with financial means. And then there was this moment while we were building that I was like, the representation factor, just the fact that Indigenous youth get to see themselves in a brand, what that actually means. We've never seen our people across mainstream media. And we knew that we were onto something because just literally a year into the business, the emails, the messages I would receive of how our products were making people feel. And it was just that concept of that when you see it, you can be it, their faces on our branding and our marketing. And our initial line of lipstick was actually called the Warrior Women Collection. And we named every shade after a Native woman or Indigenous woman who was just doing incredible work in their community and supporting their people. And what the whole concept behind that was because when I was growing up, I don't remember having a Native woman to look up to. And so that was literally the foundation of that line of products. Fast forward to where we are today. I can't even believe some mornings I wake up and I have to pinch myself. I get to walk into our headquarters now where we've built an actual lab. We employ 16 people. We employ a full-time chemist. We are creating products that are actually using ingredients found on so many of our native lands around the globe. I'm here in the east coast of Canada, which is Mi'kmaq territory, where my mother lives, and spent the last week with her picking rose hip and researching what we could do and make with rose hip. But that's just sort of a touching on the surface of what we intend to do in the labs and in the work we're creating. So we've worked with a lot of colleges and universities, and we're actually working on projects where we convert waste into usable ingredients. So waste or a byproduct, whether it's from another industry or and turn that into a raw ingredient that we're actually putting into our cosmetics products. That's the future. That's where we're heading. But what that capital that I mentioned from the beginning takes an Indigenous entrepreneur is that injects the whole ability to innovate and to create and help recreate the future for us and inspire our next generations.
That's amazing, and thanks for sharing, Jenn. And how about yourself, Melody? Can you please introduce yourself, your background, and your business, please?
Yes, absolutely. So hi, everybody. Again, my name is Melody Lewis. I'm Mohave Tewan Hopi, born and raised on the Fort Mojave Indian Reservation. I am the founder for Indigenous Community Collaborative and the co-founder for Cahokia Social Tech and Art Space. And both of the social enterprises are based here on O'odham and Peatposh land, also known as Phoenix, Arizona. And I'm so excited to be here today. Most of the work that we do is to revitalize the Indigenous perspective. And we do that in workforce development and educational strategies and capacity building. What the pandemic has shown us is how to be adaptable and diversify. And so we actually have started doing a lot of social media and YouTube. We have our own YouTube channel called Response. And so we're utilizing, the multimedia and creative arts now to amplify our mission and voice. And we like to collaborate, which is also a major thing for us. So collaboration is super key for us because we want to uplift other people's work and, want to partner with people that are already doing amazing things. And so we're doing a lot of collaboration with other Indigenous creatives and social entrepreneurs. And so I have four partners that I currently work with right now. And so massive shout out to Turquoise Devereaux, Don Magical, and Unique Yazzie, and Brian Skeet. So we're here today to talk about Indigenous entrepreneurship. And again, I'm so happy to be here.
Amazing again. Thanks for sharing a little bit about yourself and background, Melody. I'll try not to leave Steve last this time. So Steve, could you jump in and introduce your background and business, please?
Sure. Good morning, everyone from Australia. My name's Stephen Mam. I'm a Torres Strait Islander, which is a little group of islands between Australia and Papua New Guinea. I live on Aboriginal land, and I'd like to pay my respects and acknowledge elders, past, present, and emerging here on Yagara land, where I am today. It's a great honor to be here. Thank you, Dean, for organizing this. I think this is a great initiative. I've much wanted to connect with Indigenous entrepreneurs around the world, the global Indigenous community. I started about 7-8 years ago a multicultural publishing and events business, which also sort of branched out into a community space we called The Mix, which is all about making your mark. Also, like Melody, it's about creating and collaborating. I'm very strong on community values around listening, sharing story, connection, and community. And community can mean different things. It can mean coming together, supporting each other, but it's also about our decision-making process. I'm doing a lot of work with local government at the moment on the Sunshine Coast, which is a regional coastal area of Queensland. It's very exciting as we see this reawakening of Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous wisdom across Australia. So welcome and thanks for having me.
Amazing again. Thanks for sharing, Stephen, and thanks for the shout out. Also, Vanessa, I'm sure you've got a lot to talk about after last week or two. So if you could please introduce yourself, background and business, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
Yate, my name is Vanessa Roanhorse. I am Dinek Navajo from Navajo Nation. I live on Tiwa lands in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in the United States. And I am very excited to be here with this panel. Each of you I've just been impressed with and have followed in different ways. And Dean, I can just reflect when we met the first time you were here in the Southwest region, and just how easy it is to continue to build relationships with my Indigenous relatives, and how we may be so far. What you have been building continues to inspire. So I just want to say thank you for the invitation. My name is Vanessa Roanhorse, and I am the owner of and founder of Roanhorse Consulting. We're a small Indigenous led organization that does a lot of think tank work around Indigenous values, frameworks, and how we employ that towards economics, entrepreneurship, health, and also really in the space around investing in capital, which is the conversation of like, what is power building? How do we talk about reparations? And also what is the way in which we can bring our worldview to really define values and success that matters to us? That isn't always us being in reflection to non-native people, non-Indigenous people, which we're only allowed to be valued against. How do we return to a place where we say we matter through this lens, and that in a world in which Indigenous people are just as equally represented for our wisdom, that we can allow for a plurality of worldviews, because everyone deserves to come from a place in which how they want to be successful should be allowed. And so that's been a lot of the work we do at Roanhorse Consulting. I've also had the privilege in starting Roanhorse Consulting as a first-time entrepreneur, now totally addicted to building stuff. I'm not gonna lie. I never thought I would be an entrepreneur. I always thought I'd have a job for the rest of my life. So starting my own company was the hardest, most incredible journey that I continue to be on. But it was that journey that frustrated and angered me so much that I was so grateful to find 7 other Indigenous women here in the Southwest. And we came together, and lo and behold, they were having so many of the similar challenges. And I just want to name that capital issue is probably one of the biggest barriers we're facing as Indigenous people, as well as like how we get measured on the risk and valuation of what we're building. And so we co-created Native Women Lead, which is now a fast-growing global organization focused on investing, lifting into Indigenous women into positions not only of business and CEO, but ultimately power. And not in the sense of taking power, but really harmonizing and bringing women back into the circle. And I'm proud to say that work, which has all been hard work with all of us, has resulted in a moment in American history that I think is pretty unique. Last week, was it last week? Oh my goodness, a week and a half ago, we were one of the top 4 winners of it was called the Equality Can't Wait Challenge. And it was funded by Melinda French Gates, Mackenzie Scott, and her husband, Dan Lewitt, and the Stacey Schusterman for $10 million, in which we get to build and create an Indigenous women's initiative. And of course, capital is 100% at the center. And I can get into more of that, but it was a moment for us where it was wonderful not only to be seen, but to finally, for the first time, kind of have the beginning resources for what we want to do is triple it in size, and frankly, figure out how do we build this power building effort across multiple cultures and communities, recognizing we are just one space. And again, going back to that plurality of worldview, how do we create something that'll allow us to have it? So thank you so much for having me here.
100%, and congratulations, Vanessa. You're an inspiration, and yeah, I'm glad I got to meet you while I was over there. Very humbling. Yeah, let's jump into it then. Get straight into it. Let's talk about some of the tough issues. So, what's what's the biggest, been some of the biggest lessons or challenges you've had as an Indigenous entrepreneur? And start with you, Vanessa, since you seem really keen to expand a bit more into capital and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's just go right into the heart of some of what I think that battle between Western and Indigenous worldviews, but also like it just goes right to me, the heart of like how folks got their wealth, where wealth comes from, and who gets to decide who gets access to it. And for so many of us, we have incredible wisdom, incredible knowledge, and there's so many teachers and elders that can help us learn. But at the end of the day, if we're not coming down with the capital, all we are doing is continually being in a position in which we can't be in rooms to talk about what is a different way of risk assessing a company. How do we look at what we hope would be different values than credit and collateral, but different sets in which relationships, culture, and frankly, businesses that are building sustainable initiatives that aren't extracting from the earth, but coming up with solutions like Jenn is with Cheekbone Beauty to regenerate, to recirculate opportunities. And so for me, my personal journey is that, when I started my small business, consulting, we're low risk. We don't make anything. We don't technically sell anything. And going into a bank and asking for just like a $10,000 lending debt product, I was essentially not even considered seriously. It didn't matter. I had been in the black for the first 2 years, that I had like locked in my contracts for the next year, almost 100%. It was just walking into the bank was terrifying, because let's be real, I did not grow up with strong financial education. I didn't have the best credit. I mean, it's excellent now, but I mean, the level in which I had to labor to be seen, then to walk into that bank and then not even have the bank take me seriously enough to have a meeting for, at the time, $10,000 felt so massive. It was really shameful. It was terrifying. And it wasn't even humbling. Someone was like, were you humbled? I'm like, at what point am I like already so humbled? I can be further humbled. You know what I mean? Like, why am I begging for something in which I was like, and this is something my colleague Jamie says, we gave up our land. It was stolen from us. We gave up our language. We gave up our culture. When does our return on this investment come back? And so I just spent so much time thinking about that capital issue and just how awful it was. And then how so much of our networks and communities are denied and actually not allowed to engage in finance. Just fundamentally, whether it's because of the way sovereign lands and trust lands and reservation lands are provided here on this side of the world, we are unable to have a tax base. You can't have a tax base. You can't own the land beneath you, so you can't have collateral or assets. Just between those two things, it completely eliminates the opportunities in which we could grow economies, whether you want to call them economies of scale or not. So for me, that was the moment where I got mad and I said, whatever happens going forward, I need to be in that chair. And I need to be able to say, okay, so they may have bad credit, but they're building a company on their reservation. That company is going to use gray water, and they're actually providing a service like a laundromat that doesn't even exist, which is a true story today, which we're helping her find capital now. But I'm in there saying, okay, she has crappy credit and collateral, who cares? She has talked to the elders, she's got buy-in, there's no one in competition with her. Her numbers are real. You just don't understand how this works. So that's kind of where
so what
my
do you
brain
think
lives.
Yeah, sorry for butting in. But what do you think
It's okay,
they don't appreciate that? I mean, I guess, banks are, generally non-Indigenous people who are operating from a Western perspective, or like, which I guess, prioritizes profit over, what you're saying, community and sustainability.
I mean, I think it's And I'll just be honest, I think it's colonization, white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism. I mean, let's just name them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So those are all parts of the mix. How each organization or institution decides to play them out, they're all there. And I'm very much speaking from a American-based perspective, so I don't want to speak for other cultures and communities, but that is our biggest problem. The racial injustices that this country is going through, it's not, I guess it's a reckoning, but the history of this place, we won't be able to address these things until we see more of us in these decision-making rooms and these positions in which we can have, again, a plurality of worldviews and perspectives to come back and say we do not need to continue to only be measured by one worldview. There are more ways for us to do this, and then we can be a healthy country. Will we get there in my lifetime? No. But I'm going to stop because I could go on and on.
No, please do. It's invaluable, and it's one of those things, people don't really talk about. Yeah, I'm sure heaps of First Nations people in Australia definitely feel your pain. Actually, yeah, we'll come back to that. But Steve, what do you think about what Vanessa said? Any synergies, and yeah, what are the biggest challenges for Indigenous entrepreneur in Australia that you face?
Thanks, Dean. Thank you, Vanessa. That was really well said. You're so articulate and definitely a champion for Indigenous people. I agree that, what I would call systemic racism is a barrier. It doesn't, I sort of grew up learning from my parents that we had to work harder and present better and do everything 10 times bigger because we were coming from a minority. And in some ways, I didn't really believe it until now I'm nearly in my 40s. It is so much more work. There is so much more that Indigenous people do just to get the same recognition and credit from, I suppose, the broader community. And you know what? I think it's more a reflection about Indigenous capability, that we are much more sophisticated and intelligent and able to mobilize our resources from a wider network that facilitates that kind of achievement. And I suppose thinking about some of the challenges, one of the challenges that I face is that you come up against sort of different approaches to building a business and different approaches to acquiring credit and different approaches to understanding what measurements of success may be. And, we get from both the wider community, but also the Indigenous community, people that take a very corporate view around what the profit margins may be. Then there's a very grassroots sort of community view of, helping the fellow human, putting the person and the community at the center of everything that we do. And then there's some that's sort of in between that, because it can be difficult at times to walk the line or juggle the two perspectives, the two approaches, that being Western and Indigenous, that we might think and we are Indigenous, but all the laws that apply to our business are Western laws, and they have Western logic behind them. So I think, many Indigenous people in Australia certainly are challenged by the fact that how do we reconcile within ourselves mentally and spiritually what we are doing, how we are doing it, and what the benefits are to our family and our community. We often talk in Australia about deep time, this idea that it's not about this generation or the next generation. It's about 100 generations from now.
Amazing insights. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Steve. Jenn, would you like to share your thoughts on that? Insights from Canada, which have fortunately had some interesting things over the last couple of months. And most people actually look up to Canada as an inspiration for their work with Indigenous people. So it'd be interesting to hear your perspective on this challenge.
So the challenge is, I think, in entrepreneurship, as I'm listening and learning from other circles and groups I've been invited into, is that it's very similar, that without the idea of having the capital to build something, it is quite impossible. And that when you're faced with Western institutions, they have a list of metrics that they need to follow in order to meet their standard or guidelines in order to support a business or an idea. And that doesn't work for many of us because, most of us don't come from this long line of capital and had parents or family members to give us dollars in order to help us grow our businesses. And much like Stephen said, his parents let him know early on that you're going to have to work twice as hard. That's not a lie. And it's unfortunate because it's really not sustainable. If I look back to building this business, for 3 years, I had to work my full-time job, the one that I pay my bills with and feed my family, in order to do this cheekbone thing on the side. And I had this big idea and big vision. And when I was finally able to, it's almost like I had to do that grind and that hustle that the system calls it, in order to prove myself. But I nearly collapsed when that day I was able to finally quit my full-time job and just do Cheekbone, because I was working literally 100 hours a week, if not more. Like it was bananas. And is that right? Is that even like, how are people supposed to build economic security within our communities and have that mindset going into it? It would be utterly impossible. And so we need better ways. And I know that the challenges don't stop just at capital. Again, there's so many personal issues that you're dealing with when you come from our communities, which, as you mentioned in the news, it's now evident to our country because, I have relatives that are my non-Indigenous relatives and friends and coworkers that over the last few months, they call and apologize, and it's actually exhausting. I've had to ask people to stop reaching out because it's too painful. And it's a history that, as an Indigenous person or Anishinaabe woman, we knew this. We already knew all this stuff. It's not news to us, right? But it's news to everyone else. And so that energy that we've had to use in sort of taking in other people's pain right now has been like twice as daunting as finding out and that this truth does exist. Yes, that did happen. And now we have evidence, which I guess everyone needed to believe, even though we already knew that happened, has been extremely tiresome. I know for so many of our communities here in Canada, and will continue to be for quite some time. I know many of us have asked people just to stop asking us about it because it's too much. It is. And when a lot of the communities that I'm involved in are about entrepreneurship, so many of us Indigenous women are trying to work on our businesses, and then you have these other issues that you're facing at the same time, but it's part of who we are. And it's just evidence, more evidence. If I was going to give someone money and they had gone through all of this throughout their entire lives, I would give all of my money to an Indigenous business at this point in history, because damn, our people are resilient.
100%. And I saw Melody clapping when you were speaking. So yeah, feel free to jump in, Melody, and continue that.
I'm over here like, yes. I think for me, I'm pretty young business, right? I'm starting on my second year here. And the reason why we started our company and why we now are going to open up a space here in downtown Phoenix called Cahokia is because there's constant and resonating themes that us as Indigenous individuals go through, and no matter where we are at in our life, they're the same themes but represented in a different way. And those themes being like representation and translation. So when I went to college, I was the only, I could look around the room and be the only Native in the classroom. And now that I started my business, I'm trying to get support and services from a local entrepreneurship company, and I have to do this, like, again, only Native in the room. I could look around and just be like, oh, I'm the only Native, and then going into like trying to get services and support no matter where I'm at on their journey, I have to go through this extra phase of translation. Like what you're giving me doesn't really make sense to me, or it does, but I have to figure out how this applies to my community. Like that whole representation and translation thing is constantly happening, and it's a thing for us in the United States and in my community, where it's a common thing where they say you're living in two worlds, but again, it's I think with our company, all of our programming is rooted in Indigenous identity because it's one and the same. We can't separate it. Like if I'm it's a constant thing also too of like learning and unlearning. So I'm like going into a westernized system and learning this system, and then I have to unlearn it and figure out how to apply this piece to this piece. It is exhausting. Like it's this constant like cycle, and I think being an Indigenous entrepreneur, you're having to navigate these systems and figuring out, again, how those things align to yourself and to your identity and to your community. And everything that you guys are speaking about, all the fellow panelists, is exactly the same things that we're going through right now. It's like, okay, how do I get access to capital? I don't know about doing that stuff. Or how do I get property? Or, it's a constant learning, and then you're getting in there and trying to figure out, okay, I'm here now. How does this apply to my community? So I have to unravel that and apply it. So I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges and lessons learned for myself is oftentimes I will be the only person there, and I'm oftentimes that anytime I'm in a place, I'm going to have to do translation, and it's just part of it, and while trying to balance being a Native woman and carrying all of the cultural things that come with that. So I don't know, being Indigenous, but I wouldn't change it for the world, which is another thing. I would go through this, no matter where. You ask me to do this all over again, absolutely, hands down, I do it, because I'd be darned if I'll be darned if I take for granted what my ancestors, my grandparents, my mother went through, and not might make something for us today.
Amazing. Yeah, thanks for that, Melody. And yeah, we'll try to celebrate Indigenous People's Days. We'll try not to get too negative, but yeah, I think how do you access capital? Well, I think there was a study recently, and they found most of these big startups and these next millionaires actually come from wealthy families. So if you can find a wealthy family in an Indigenous community, I think you're pretty much there. But there's a question from one of the participants, Omar Khalifa. Feel free to virtually slap me if I pronounce that wrong. But she asks, can Indigenous entrepreneurs work within the current ecosystem, or keep trying to change it, or create one that values finances and supports them separately, or a combination? Anybody got any thoughts on that question from one of the attendees?
I would love to just kick it off for everyone and hear what you're thinking, because I'm grappling with this right now. I think the system is broken, and I think we have no choices. Miss Octavia Butler reminds us that we can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. However, the tools that are here, what do we need to be doing? And this is similar to what you're talking about, Melody, which is I think as Indigenous people, we have the ability to live in the past, present, and future simultaneously because of the way we've been taught. So we actually are the perfect community to be creating the future financial tools and the future economic systems, because we're able to understand how we got here and these tools that are in front of us. Play with them, which is what we're doing here within Roan Horse Native Women Lead, with the intention of dreaming the future tools. I'm not convinced that we have to, again, value and find a way to fit ourselves into the current system, which I do believe is broken, because by doing that, we just perpetuate the same conversations. We will continue to harm ourselves in the same way. However, we need to be able to sort of say, what of these current tools can we begin to start with? And there are things like character-based lending, which is not new. It's been done in many places. Some may call it relationship-based lending. It's basically creating a lending process that supports people, not using things like credit and collateral or the 5 C's of credit. There are new types of things like equity-like financing products where we are slapping together revenue-based instruments and grants, and we're looking at like leveraging things like lines of credit to procurement notes to, how do we create a capital stack where they can come in tranches for community members so that no one's overwhelmed, but it comes along with like high creative technical supports like we're trying to build at Native Women Lead. And then alongside of that, some runway capital. So things like integrated capital funds, right? Everyone's super excited about it. The truth of it is we're going to have to play and test. Our challenge is that we're not allowed to fail as Indigenous people. And so when we give money to someone, they have to pay it back. They have to win. They have to be a Cheekbone Beauty, because when they're not, that's when we start to see everyone being like, yeah, your experiment doesn't work. That's the part for me where I'm like, if we don't keep demanding and pushing and saying we have to recognize that the systems of finance is designed for a very slim group of people who have maintained this power. And it's not just impacting Indigenous people, it's impacting all communities of color at this point. Something's wrong, right? Like something is fundamentally wrong. So I guess my short answer, Omar, is, this is so not a short answer. This is like long for the long. So I don't know why I said that, is we have no choice because we're here today, but Indigenous people are future thinkers who have connection to our ancestors. We're the ones who can think of the tools for tomorrow. What we need is allies and friends to come alongside us, take the hits, and trust us.
I absolutely agree, Vanessa. And I think sometimes we underestimate the intrinsic value and benevolence that's in the community. And something that I've looked at over the years is also understanding, what is my market? Because when I start looking around at my allies and my families and my friends, I've got a separate market that's operating in parallel or in multi-dimensions to what's happening in the Western world. When there's a financial crisis, it's not necessarily affecting my market. So I think better analysis of what our markets are and how they interact can also lead to understanding the risks involved with capital.
So true. Anything to add on to that, Melody or Jen?
Yeah, I'll just add that just to echo off what the co-panelists were talking about, is that we have this like innate ability and ancestral knowledge that we have as a basis for us to navigate these systems. So I think that's an advantage of an Indigenous entrepreneur. Say that like 5 times, it's hard to, but as an Indigenous entrepreneur, we have that in us, that ability to use that knowledge to navigate these systems. And that is value-based. Everything that we've talked to, Jen talked about resiliency, but it is like using our community value systems and utilizing some of the knowledge that was passed down to us from our ancestors that that set the foundation for us to, again, navigate these systems. So I'm at an advantage, I think.
And one thing, in that sort of year and a half of the beginning building of Cheekbone Beauty, it was probably 2 years, but I literally read over 100 books. No business degree, no background in business. So I truly had, and I still admit I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm learning and figuring this out as I go. But what I really remember from a lot of these big founder stories, every single one of them at some point in their life ends up in some Indigenous community, at some community around the world, because they're searching for how to do what they want to do correctly and properly. And I've, in the last couple of years, had this aha where it's like they're going and seeking what Indigenous people already hold. And yet when you come to this as an Indigenous person through this Indigenous lens, you actually see it differently. So it's something that just can't be bought or shared or traded. It actually has to be innately in you. And it's really and truly going to come from our communities and I look at this through an environmental issue. When you think about climate issues and this massive problem, you see Indigenous communities make up 5% of the entire population of the world and are the ones protecting 80% of the world's biodiversity. That's massive. So, there's all this discussion online in activist groups and climate activist groups about human beings are doing all these bad things. Not all human beings. So I think it's really important that the allies truly start to work with Indigenous communities and not just go there, think they take what they want, go back, because it's obviously not working.
Yeah, so true. And you touched on so many good points. I think a lot of people are starting to, look internally and externally about, are we doing things the right way? Do we need to change, the hardcore, capitalist structure that works for a few to benefit the many? And obviously Indigenous communities operated for tens of thousands of years based on, helping and operating togetherness and thrived, before colonization. So there's a lot to learn from Indigenous knowledge and ways of doing things. And talking about that, I guess leads into another section to talk about is Indigenous versus Western entrepreneurship or perspectives. Anybody want to jump in and expand on that? What are the differences for you between Indigenous and Western entrepreneurship?
I'll just go ahead and start because the one that I think is different for Indigenous and Westernized worldview for myself has been, Dean, I like how you bucketed it for me when I read your article, when I first came across your article, but it is really about motive-based and value-based for myself. A lot of the work that I do, which I think is kind of what we're experiencing right now, is that we're functioning from a collectivist Indigenous worldview, and community and family will always come first in regards to our decision making and our business plan, and everything that we do is rooted in that way. So currently, right now, we're trying to seek funding and to support our location here in Phoenix, and I'm really trying to find the words to share like I guess it goes back to impact. So how we could get the metrics and the numbers right for us to convey to funders of what our potential impact would be. And for us, it's like, well, we're trying to support our community and Indigenous entrepreneurs, and that's my number, or I'm trying to infuse Indigenous worldview, so that's my number. Well, what's your funding stream, and what's this, And so I think already it's like we're already speaking two different languages. So I think that's the difference for me when it comes to like operations and further, funding and development opportunities for us.
So probably, I guess, not enough value on that collective and community development perspective over, they probably value more of the bottom line and how much they're going to get back. Interesting. And anybody else? What about you, Steve? Any thoughts on that?
No, I think much of it we've already discussed today.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Jen?
Yeah. So there's a lot that we incorporate. Like, even so, this is going to sound, I'm always like, when I'm explaining it, I'm like, we built the business with this through this whole different perspective that I've never seen before in business. One, we walk around and we talk about pre-1492. And so I'm like, imagine, there's no holidays that are based on Christianity that are celebrated within our company. And that's just one step. And we do everything, so there's no celebrations of any of those things because we're trying to literally go back in time is how I talked about it from the beginning. I don't know if this will always work because now we're hiring so many more people and there's so many more cultures. And then I also want it to feel inviting for everyone when they come to work at our company. But this is how we started. And it was based on this idea that let's see what we can do when we do look back and dive deep back and think about how things were built, and using 7 grandfather teachings. So Anishinaabe, those are basic teachings like love, respect, humility, truth. And then we have those as our core values on the walls at Cheekbone Beauty. And so it's, I don't think a lot of times in business you hear people talking about love, right? Like, we built a business that was about giving back to community. So love is ultimately the foundation of that. And when we started this, it was about this whole idea about giving back without expecting anything in return. And that is really the opposite of business, because business is all about this. The Western view of business is all about transactional relationships constantly. Whereas we're like, no, we're here to give back and we're not expecting anything in return. Like, it's interesting, even engagement online, especially in this last year, where that's how we've had to engage with all of our community, which we say community and we speak about our customers as well as the communities that we live in. And we're engaging with people and they're like, so many times, our team and our customer relationship management team would be like, oh, this person, we talk about the feedback we get from community, and people would be talking about not being able to purchase something or they'll get it later. And we're like, yeah, ask us what you want. We're here. We'll give you any insights or information, anything you need. And there's zero expectation. And I think it's just through this lens and this idea of, we just want to keep giving as much as we possibly can. We actually call it streams of giving within our company. So not only do we give back financially to several organizations, we give back in products and in service and in time. And it's just this whole platform that we use as a way to really and it goes back to our mission and vision of making sure that Indigenous people feel like they matter and that they have a place where they belong. And so we're here. We always say we're not even here just to answer makeup or cosmetics questions. If you have any question, you can ask us, and we make this a really comfortable place for people to come and find answers to the best of our ability. Where obviously there's we make a ton of mistakes, and we don't pretend to have this whole idea perfectly addressed, but we're working really hard to just do things differently and do it in a good way.
I appreciate that so
I'd like
much,
to.
Jen. No, go, Stephen.
Now you can, Stephen. Now you can. You were handballing
His
it off
mind was excited. He heard something.
Thanks,
the
Jen.
men speak up after the women.
Yeah, I think that within my own culture and what I know of Aboriginal culture is that we are all connected. And I often think of some Aboriginal language that I've learned, which is Napachi Napachi. So, and what that means is what's good for you is good for me, and what's good for me is good for you. And, you know, it's not just about a willingness to contribute and to give and to receive, but it's also about a responsibility. And I think it was Melody that was talking about this environmental perspective. And I love the idea that with everything that I do, I think about how does it benefit country? How does it benefit Mother Nature? And in that sense, we are all connected through Mother Nature, and we have a responsibility to look after each other.
Totally agree, and I really like that. It made me think of some of the things we talk a lot about at my company in ESO with Native Women Lead, is that you should not be anywhere where your children and your elders can't be. So like we work really hard to ensure our spaces are for everyone, and that in that space building, that children are welcome, that our parents are welcome, our grandparents are welcome, and that like as we continue this part of the language that we're telling around entrepreneurship, business, and finance, how do we turn those into our folklores again? How do we turn those into our stories so that our communities, because like I don't know about how many of you, but my parents don't understand what I'm doing. They're like, entrepreneurship, consulting, what is this? Integrated capital, like they don't understand it because it's the language of not my people's language, and it's not how we talk about these things. So we spend a lot of time thinking about in our business development, our business growth, how do we ensure that we can bring all of our communities in to hear how we're building, hear how we're talking, but also this goes back to language, which I think is so critical. We've been exploring at my company this idea of like contract language is just so complicated and so cumbersome. And honestly, it's unnecessarily complicated because really all of you want to know at the end of the day is like, what do I own and what do I don't own? What am I giving up? What can I take? How much am I making? Are you going to pay me back? If we have a breach of contract, then what do we do? At the end of that's really all you want to know. So why does it have to be so complicated? So we've been thinking a lot about what is our ability to take things like contracts and agreements and NDAs and all of these tools that actually, if we're all honest with ourselves, we all got screwed back in the day by these types of tools. And what can we do to actually rethink and reclaim some of that? And really just imagine, like, you wouldn't just ask someone also when you're buying something to pay for it all on their own and wait till you pay for it back. You would actually do an equal exchange. And so we've been thinking also as well for particularly our creatives, how do we create finance and funds for them so they can just be like, look, you want to build your thing? Great. We're going to pay 75% upfront because we believe in you and we know how hard it is to get the capital. And we're going to give you a contract that actually is only going to be one page. It's very clear what you own. It's very clear what we own. And then at the end of the day, it's like we can come together in like real people's terms and talk through these. But I think those are like examples, which is having children available. We offer childcare always. We also provide transportation to any of our events. We went virtual because we all had to, but that virtuality allowed for flexibility, and we're going to continue. But we also, in our practice, in our process, we ensure storytelling happens, meaning people get to check in and say how they're doing. All of this just goes back to like, what can we do to allow for the way our thinking is shared. And then as we're building these things, what are the dances? What are the stories? What are the songs we want to create? And I know I sound crazy because I'm like, who wants to create a song about an integrated capital fund? I do, because I want my grandmother to understand what the hell I'm talking about. I want my 7-year-old to know what I'm saying. And I want him to know that like this language that we're talking about is actually a way of giving and receiving. And it's a way about keeping that circle going. And it's everything you just said, Stephen, right? It's the things that you're talking about. So that's the stuff that I think about when I think about Indigenous entrepreneurship is who else thinks this way? And who else is trying to build these things this way? We are, right? And again, why we need to be leading these new tools and helping to create that translation forward. I'm done, thank you.
Amazing, Vanessa. When I had this idea for this event, I was like, yeah, we'll go to Stephen, talking to Stephen. We're like, oh yeah, an hour and a half. He's like, that's a long time. I'm like, yeah. But hearing you speak, Melody speak, Jenn speak, you know, there's so much invaluable insights and ways of doing things. You know, we haven't got long to finish this, but we could keep going for a long time, I bet. But there's a few important points there, like obviously, yeah, Indigenous led. I think non-Indigenous people have been leading us around for, you know, hundreds of years, a bit too long now. So, you know, they should be supporting instead of trying to take over per se. And because I was one of the attendees had a question around, want to dive in deeper around Indigenous versus non-Indigenous entrepreneurship, I'm going to quickly share a document just to, I guess, build on what the panelists have already spoken about. But obviously First Nations people, Native Americans, you know, been around for a long time before colonizations, thousands of years, and, you know, built societies and ways of doing things, which still, you know, built economic, you know, in Australia, we built the oldest agriculture structure in the world, you know, which was used to fish and catch eels. So there was still innovation in our communities, but it was built obviously in a different way that respected the environment and, you know, managed the land instead of, you know, just focusing on, I guess, commercial development. So we've been around here for a long time. Some famous Australian Indigenous innovations, the Budge Bin, which is the oldest agricultural site in the world, which farm eels and fish. Archaeologists have also found, you know, baking utensils and tools used in Australia for baking, and obviously a big thing in Australia because of the bushfires and everything, going back to Indigenous knowledge around fire stick farming to maintain large areas of land for controlled burning and land management. So, you know, these societies operated and do things differently, you know, different values. So obviously there's going to be, I guess, you know, for the dominant Western culture, in most Indigenous communities, you know, this, I guess, needs to come together a bit more and figure out how, you know, we can support Indigenous people and the way they're doing things instead of trying to colonize them in Indigenous entrepreneurship, to operate from a Western entrepreneurship model instead of, you know, traditional Indigenous ways of doing things. But with that, you know, there's not much time left. We're here to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day, United Nations come together. So another question, what has been your biggest highlight? And I know for Vanessa, this is quite recently, but what has been your biggest highlight so far of being an Indigenous entrepreneur? or biggest win?
I have I have one because it's a pretty exciting time for us at Cheekbone Beauty. We launch in Sephora.ca this September, on September 21st. So that for us is a really big win, because it was always our goal to partner with a brand like Sephora. One, because they're global, and we had these big lofty dreams of becoming and still do a global beauty brand. So it's happening very, very quickly. So our team is working around the clock trying to make all of those things happen. So that's exciting for us right now.
Awesome, nice work. Have anybody else? Melody, you just kicked off a co-working space, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I just want to, somebody just asked, is like Indigenous entrepreneurship practices, is that at the beginning of decolonizing agenda? So I'm just going to pair with my highlight, because my dear friend, Turquoise Devereaux, she's does a lot of work with me here at Indigenous CC, and she always says, just being an Indigenous person and existing in a westernized space is decolonizing it, because those systems weren't made for us and we weren't meant to be here, right? So here we are, surviving and existing in westernized spaces is decolonizing it. So I think our next step for us, and a highlight for us, is that we want to cultivate more Indigenous entrepreneurs and create and advocate for more Indigenous-led spaces so we could continue to do that, right? Decolonizing spaces. So our highlight is that we've been able to get access to space in downtown Phoenix, and we've created a Indigenous-led platform for creative placekeeping. It's called Cahokia Social Tech and Art Space. We're literally in downtown Phoenix. It's so crazy for us to be here. And so we're able to activate space, indigenize space, all through the creative arts and supporting social entrepreneurs. So that's our highlight. And we're not, another cool thing is that we're not open to the public until October. And we literally had an event every other day. And that just goes to show us that the community is ready and wanting this space. And it's just been great. So
it's amazing. Congratulations, especially, through an pandemic, which is, awesome.
We were working pretty hard. Yeah.
Yeah. God. I think, Vanessa, we've already talked about how much amazing work you've done, and world domination's coming up and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I just want to say, really quick, keep your eyes peeled. We'll be announcing at the end of this year the first ever Indigenous Women's Investment Fund in the United States, a $10 million capital fund for Indigenous women, looking for 50 to 250K for capital to help them leapfrog their business. So that's a big announcement. And
you heard it first on here.
But I also want to just say, I just have to celebrate. I know, Stephen, you're about to tell us yours, but one thing I want to know is, like, I think we forget, because as Indigenous people, we're not, like, I don't know if it's for all cultures, but I know for mine, we are not very much looked upon to, like, be bold or boast about what you're doing. It's sort of like, so I just want to be everyone's hype person and say, hell yeah, congratulations. This is so awesome. You guys are kicking butt. And I just, so much energy is being sent to you from me, because this is not easy and those are massive wins. So if you can't do all of the hyping yourself, just call me. I will join you in a meeting. I'll be like, did you know Melody just did this? Did you know? And you can just sit there and just be you. So sorry, Stephen, please go, because I want to celebrate you too.
Thank you.
That's amazing. Congrats.
I think one of the biggest achievements for me is sort of happening at the moment. And I can't talk too much about it because it's a bit hush-hush, but it's essentially about reaching into spaces that have been colonized, and into geographic areas where First Nations people have been pushed out or dwindled down, don't have much influence, and working with non-Indigenous businesses and corporates and government to help them appreciate the value that Indigenous people bring to economies, and the important role that they play as well in terms of looking after country, in terms of a labour market that is often untapped or not fully utilised. And it's in that way that, you know, since colonisation, a lot of First Nations people have been locked out from these areas. And even and with being physically locked out, our relationships have also had boundaries around them. So what I'm hoping to do is to really champion First Nations economic capabilities and open up these geographic spaces and relationships with the non-Indigenous community that can help to bring us closer together.
Great work. Actually, I guess building on that, you know, how can the wider business and, you know, non-Indigenous community around the world do better or do more to support Indigenous entrepreneurship? I don't know if it's just me, but the way I operate, you know, Barrigamel and my business, I get put in the social entrepreneurship or the minority thing, and I'm like, no, I'm Indigenous entrepreneur. We do Indigenous entrepreneurship, not social entrepreneurship. So, you know, how can the wider non-Indigenous community support Indigenous entrepreneurship?
I always have I now have some great tips. I didn't early on, but it's what people have done to support Cheekbone Beauty that's been super helpful. And one is at any of those events where I've made connections, it's those connector kind of people or folks that are there that have introduced me to this person that helped me with this thing or this other person. So just, you know, always, I guess, having your feelers out. And if you know of an entrepreneur that is struggling or needs support, just thinking about who you can connect that person to that could possibly help them. And I spoke at an event and then I would get an email from someone and they would say, do you think you could meet this person? And if I felt it was useful or would help, I would say yes. And so many times it's those meetings have been crucial in what we've been able to do. And two, I wanted to add just from the last, like those wins and those great successes. I always think it's really important for new entrepreneurs or anyone that maybe hasn't had such a massive win or feels like it's not that big, that those you don't have to have those huge grandiose wins to be winning, right? At the end of the day, it's how you feel about the work you're doing. And I am just so grateful to be surrounded by such incredible other Indigenous entrepreneurs that, like Vanessa said, that are your hype people, because it is so culturally inappropriate sometimes for us to hype our own stuff. And it feels weird. It really there's a lot of awesome things that happen for Cheekbone Beauty, and I share like the really exciting ones, but I don't, because it feels weird. It doesn't feel right. I don't know why, but I think it is culturally. We've been always raised to be super, super humble, which is good, but there needs to be a balance. Some days you do have to cheer yourself on. And so if your win is just like this little tiny thing, like feel it, enjoy it. It's all part of this incredible journey.
So true. Yeah, so many good points. How about yourself, Vanessa? Any points for non-Indigenous people on how they could support Indigenous entrepreneurship better?
Yeah, so I think my question I get a lot with is, you know, where do I start or who should I talk to? And I think what's really critical is you have Indigenous visionaries and entrepreneurs where you live. They're there. The challenge is, will you do the work, one, to understand the history of the lands you're on, and then do the work to build a relationship. And a relationship is defined very differently by everybody. How you define relationship and community, that is also the task, I think, for us to all think about. But I encourage everyone, They're in your community. They're your neighbors. You probably haven't seen them. There's also probably incredible organizations who are already trying to support them, who are working with them, who have been trying to build and amplify their work. So there are networks and ecosystems that have been growing organically and have been building, but have been completely overlooked. I think now we're in this interesting moment in time where people are wondering, where are our Indigenous visionaries, entrepreneurs, and leaders? It's not that we're not here, it's that you just haven't spent the time to find us. So please go out, build your relationships, define what kind of relationship you want. And also at the end of the day, know the history of that place. So when you engage an Indigenous person, you're not putting the labor on us to teach you the history of these lands, that you understand those own histories, and that when you come to us, we can present our brilliance instead of spending the majority of our time telling you what you should know about the history of where you live.
Incredible. Thanks for sharing, Vanessa. I thought Stephen was going to jump in there after the women again, but yeah, there he is.
The only thing that I think of is recently an auntie told me that a great way to look at everything that's around us is as a gift. Everything is a gift to this world, and rather than a resource, because once you start looking at things as resources, that's when it becomes extractive and it has a finite lifespan. And Indigenous people are very much, and I think everyone in the world is a gift to this world, and we need to have that sort of centered approach when we're engaging with other people.
I think I'll just add something just to say that, Vanessa, everything that you just said is absolutely yes. All of that. I think by taking on your own learning journey of seeking out who those Indigenous communities are as just the starting point, and then identifying what those organizations are that are supporting Indigenous communities is easy as a Google search. So if you take on that journey, your own learning journey, absolutely yes, that would go a long way. And then secondly, everything that we talked about today of just investing in those organizations, and if investing monetarily, and then even if it's just like sharing something that they're doing, an event, showing up and supporting in that way, that's easy, right? So and that's how non-Indigenous communities can support Indigenous entrepreneurs.
Amazing. Thanks again. And yeah, coming up to closing, you really appreciate everybody jumping on, taking the time to provide invaluable feedback and insights as Indigenous people. Any last thoughts or comments from the panel that you would like to mention that maybe we didn't talk about?
I'll go first this time. I'd really like to know where to from here. You know, if there are First Nations, Indigenous entrepreneurs out there, what is the best way for us to connect, come together, or how do we create a space and a place for sharing these experiences more regularly?
Interesting. Might have to follow up with the United Nations for that one, but yeah, I'll get back to you. Great point, Steve. Anybody else? No? Actually, I'd like to, before we close the remarks, I'd like to touch on something Jenn said earlier on in the webinar around, these successful entrepreneurs, business people, celebrities, and all that kind of stuff, actually going into, even though they made their money from Western ways and economies, going back into Indigenous communities to learn from them, because they're missing something and they're trying to find it, their connection to land, their community. I'd like to share you a little YouTube clip before we close things down of Hugh Jackman. You might know him. He's only a humble Aussie, but he's been in movies like Wolverine. Next man. Let me know if you can hear this too.
There's no sound on our end.
There's a magical effect that the
now?
landscape has and that the people, the Aboriginal people have. And I was Aboriginal people and trying to understand how to make everything work and deal with years of, you've worked in communities, haven't you? Yes, I have. Well, tell me about that. When I was at university, a mate of mine said, oh, look, there's a job going out in the outback. Do you want to come out? We're going to build some houses and we'll be out for a couple of months. And I was nursing a broken heart at the time. So, oh, yeah, let's go. And so I went out there, and day after day, week after week, there's a magical effect that the landscape has and that the people, the Aboriginal people have. And I was very sheltered. I didn't realize it, but I really had not been outside of Sydney much. So to be out there and live there, and then for a while, then I was offered a job at another community where I was the only white fella out there. There was nobody else. And for 1 month, I lived out there. And honestly, if it wasn't for my dad, I'd still be out there. I rang my dad and I was like, Dad, day after day, I feel happier and happier. I feel more content. I feel everything's right with the world. The things that mattered to me, what job I'm doing, whatever it is, it does not matter anymore. I've got great friends. I think I'm going to live out here forever. And he's like, great, love the idea. How about you come back and finish college and see how you go? And that's why I came back. And it really was where I think I grew up. It's when I first started to contemplate who I was. I wasn't just reacting to things that happen in life. I was like, okay, who am I? What do I want to do in this world? What do I want to say? But you also start to get a sense of what happens politically and how our governments have crushed First Nations people for many years. Did it anger you in that way? Absolutely, it angered me. It angered me on two fronts. First of all, it angered me the way the media had portrayed the Aboriginal people, because my experience of living with them was not envious, but I was inspired. I was inspired by the family. I was inspired by the community. I was inspired by their culture, their togetherness. I'd only seen images of problems, whether it was drinking, whether it was poverty, whether it was health issues. That's all I knew about the Aboriginal people. And I wanted to go back and say, hang on a sec, forget those images. You need to go out there and we need to learn from the Aboriginal people. That, and also I went to a school where I had no idea about the stolen generation. I didn't even know that happened. So I'm not that old. I mean, I left school 20, 25 years ago. How can you go through an entire education without learning what really happened? And that's what I mean.
Yeah, hopefully that was a good. Whoa. Whoa, hopefully that was a good summary of what you were talking about, Jen, around successful people going into Indigenous communities. I'd like to, end it here. Thanks again for everybody joining us to celebrate Indigenous entrepreneurship on the United Nations Indigenous Day of Indigenous People. Like I said, they've got an event coming up at 11 p.m. Australian time, or if you're in the US, once you have a good night's rest, you can watch it at 9 a.m. your time in the morning. But thanks for the amazing panel of Indigenous entrepreneurs, Jen, Melody, Vanessa, Stephen, for jumping on, sharing your stories, perspectives, and discussing, Indigenous entrepreneurship, the differences, and I guess how we can create a better world through it. Again, I'd like to acknowledge First Nations people throughout the world and wish to pay our respects to our elders, past and present, and acknowledge the important role First Nations people can continue to play within the global business community. And yeah, hopefully you learned a lot from it. And moving forward, we can support Indigenous entrepreneurship a lot more and a lot better and create a better world through it. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you all.